are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Technology is great when it works, but when it doesn't, wow. Well, hello and welcome to People Making Money, one of the Way to Wow shows. We're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about job hunting, starting and building a business, and building wealth, all of the financial aspects of our lives. So just before the show started, one of my colleagues dropped by for a few minutes. She was bringing me some papers. I think she's a regular viewer of the show because she mentioned she was going to try and tune in again to this morning our time anyway. And she was asking me, well, what is your topic? And the topic is one very near and dear to my heart. How saying no builds wealth and sanity, for that matter. It is an incredibly hard lesson to learn. One that it took me years and years to even realize was a possibility. So, I came out of a situation, situation. That's not the right thing. I mean, I was raised that you say yes, right? And if you've ever if you've seen the show I did with my friend Bob Sanders, he does a play on some company slogan. He says, "Just say yes." Just say yes to opportunity. And in general, I think that is a good philosophy. However, there are times when saying no is undoubtedly not only the correct answer, it's the very, very best thing that you can say. And as I reflect back on my life, I'm not a young guy anymore. There are many times that, in retrospect, I wish I had the wisdom to say no, whether it was a business situation or, for that matter, even some personal situations. So I'll start out with a bit of a story, or not a bit of a story, with a story. In the Navy, we call these sea stories. We should have a similar phrase for the business world, I think. So uh, um, I was, gosh, now I've gone up on the story. I was just telling my colleague. So I had a client, a prospective client came to me, and she owned this was when I had my real estate company, back from the mid 80s to the mid 2000s. And client came, I don't remember how she found out about me, but one of the things my company did was manage property, and back then I managed apartment buildings here in Los Angeles, which frankly I would not do today. Too difficult today. And she had, as I recall, 4 buildings, 3 or 4 buildings. None of them were particularly nice buildings, but whatever. It was a big chunk of business. And she wanted to know if I would manage the buildings for her. And I said, well, let's talk about it, kind of thing. And we talked about it, and she really, grilled me on the fee, really, negotiated hard on the fee. And right at that time, I got a sense, wait a minute, this is not a good situation. But I felt like, you never say no. So I negotiated the best deal that I could, and I took on the properties. And from the beginning, I regretted it. So at the time, both of my parents worked for me, even though they had at that point been divorced for gosh, probably about, let's see, this would have been probably for about 20 years, over 20 years. And my mother did the bookkeeping, and paying all the checks and that kind of stuff in the office. And my dad, who was basically retired at that point, but and didn't really have anything to do, and so I got him a box of tools, and he was kind of the handyman for the various buildings that I managed. And my dad always loved doing that kind of stuff, and he would go and he would meet with the tenants, and my dad could be very charming at times. I remember one of the female tenants calling me after my dad had repaired something for him, saying, "Oh, your handyman is so nice," blah 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 blah. And I said, "Oh, well, that's my dad." She's like, "That's your dad," kind of thing. So it's very very funny. But he really enjoyed, like I said, sort of going from building to building and fixing this and that, and helping the tenants and all that kind of stuff. So uh, this particular client, I'm going to call her Julie. That is not her real name. That's just a name I picked out of the air. So Julie, uh, right away started making all kinds of demands that were way out of line, um, and uh, and yet at the same time, she would just not spend a penny on maintaining any of her buildings. So in one situation, I had a tenant call me to let me know that there were cockroaches in their house. That's pretty disgusting, by the way. And so I checked the records of the building that I had gotten, and there was no pest control service there. Now, here in Los Angeles, especially with older buildings, and these all were older buildings built in the 30s, 40s, that kind of time frame, you have to have pest control, spraying around the buildings once a month minimally. And then usually the pest control service, for the monthly fee, they'll also do the interiors of, usually it was a couple apartments a month, if need be. And I realized the building didn't have that service. We're talking about something that, again, at the time was, I think, $25 a month, maybe $30 a month. Very inexpensive. And so I went ahead and engaged a pest control service. And when the owner got the statement for that month, she called me up furious that I had instituted a pest control service to spray the building, and insisting that I cancel the pest control service, and insisting that the tenants just kept a filthy house, and that's why they had cockroaches. When I told her why I had done it, and I told her, look, I walked through the apartment. Their house is kept well. This is not due to something that they're doing. It is a problem with almost all buildings like yours, especially in that area. And big argument about it. I think in the end, I ended up having to cancel it. She refused to pay for it, and right then and there, she told me that she was not interested in anything other than squeezing every last penny out of these buildings, no matter what the consequences, the situation for the tenants, the impact on my ability to effectively manage the buildings, etc. And so sometime later, I think maybe a month later, not very long after that month, maybe a month and a half later, I was actually in Palm Springs on another project, and my dad called me up, and interesting dynamics of parents. Even though my parents had been divorced for a long time, my dad was always very protective of my mother if given the opportunity. So my dad called. It was my dad calling, and he said I need to talk to you about something. I'm like, yeah, what's up? He said, well, Julie screamed at your mother. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, I guess so. The long and the short of it was, the client Julie had called my mother up and had screamed at her about, I don't know, whatever, the bills or this or that. And my dad was incensed that a client would do that. So I said, well, thanks for letting me know. I'll give mom a call and find out what's going on. And called my mother up and asked her what was going on. Now, from my mother's perspective, having worked for a lot of very high pressure people, me not among them, I hope, she was kind of used to people screaming at her. And so when I asked her, I said, what's going on? She said, regular day. I'm like, well, Dad said that, Julie went off on you, screamed at you. She says, oh yeah, she does it almost every time she calls. I'm like, what? She said, yeah, that's who she is, kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's not acceptable. I'm sorry. I'm dumping her. Please box up all of her records, cut final checks, do final reports for her, and I'll have Dad come by and pick up the box and deliver it to her and tell her she's fired. I was just fed up with it at that point. And I called my dad back and told him what I wanted him to do, and he's like, gladly, he despised this woman. And she, I talked to my dad afterwards. She was shocked that I would have the temerity to fire her, especially summarily like that. And my attitude, at that point was, you are so difficult to deal with. Uh, you are abusing me, my staff, the tenants in your buildings. Just not going to be a part of that. And I could have saved myself a tremendous amount of grief, and not to mention a financial loss, because when you take on a property management contract, there's a big upfront workload. It takes time to sort of pay that off, if you will, based on the monthly fee. And so there was a lot of time and work that in the end I never got compensated for because I fired her. But the fact of the matter was, she was so demanding. I was never going to make any money working for her. I should have, when I got that sort of spidey sense or whatever it is, I should have said, you know what? No, I don't want to handle your properties. That would have been, it would have saved me time, aggravation, money. I mean, there was nothing good I got out of that, except that it drove home the lesson that I don't have to say yes to every client. And this was the second client I had fired, really in my career up to that point. And after the first one, you thought I would have learned my lesson, right? Once burned, shame on you. Twice burned, shame on me. It took me that second time to understand that one of the most important skills we can have in business is the ability to say no. And then that in the end is better than having to fire a client, where in essence you've said yes to the client and now you're turning around and firing them. And they take a lot of umbrage at that. They get very upset, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the kind of situation that hopefully we can learn to avoid by cultivating, the ability to say no. So I have some thoughts on this that I want to share with you, that hopefully will make it easier for you to develop this skill. So first of all, I think it's important to look, why is it so hard to say no? Right? I mean, the fact of the matter is, a number of problems in life and even in our society, in theory, could be solved if people had a better ability to say no. So, one is, I think there's a cultural bias toward yes. Despite the decline in creation of new businesses in this country over this last several decades. Nonetheless, we're still a pretty entrepreneurial culture, and an entrepreneurial culture breeds this sense that we have to say yes. And again, going back to where I started, with my friend Bob, just say yes. In many cases, yes is the right answer. Maybe in most cases, it's the right answer, but it's not always the right answer. And that's the key. So while we have a cultural bias toward saying yes, that we have to sometimes overcome that for the good of our business and our sanity ourselves. So I think that's one issue. Another is, there's a sort of a fear of missing out. Like, well, maybe I don't understand this fully. Maybe there's more to it that we just haven't gotten to yet. And if I say no, I'll never find that out. So, okay, I'm going to say yes and sort of go with the flow. Or there's a fear of burning bridges. So if I say no to this one, then this person will never refer anything to me again if it's a referral source, or if I say no to a potential customer or client, they'll never come back to me. Uh, and so I'm going to say yes, even though it doesn't make sense for me to be doing this in my business. And then also I think there's a certain guilt, especially for those of us who are people pleasers. And I certainly, as a middle child, especially, right? It's like endemic to middle children. We're people pleasers. And so to say no, we feel guilty, like we're not doing what we're supposed to do. And then there's also this sort of sunk cost bias that we have. And that is, once I'm into it, I can't back out of it because I've already spent so much time on this. I've already put all this effort into it, or I may have even invested some money in it. So I can't turn around now and say no, because I'll lose that whole investment to date. And the problem with that is that once you've sunk the time, energy, money into something, that's gone no matter what. So the issue isn't what you've put in before. The issue is, what is this going to cost me going forward? And is that cost worth the potential gain? That's always the equation. What's already been invested is almost never relevant. What's really relevant is, what can I expect to gain versus what will I continue to have to put in? Okay. So we need to look at the total investment, what we've already put in, plus what we need to put in going forward, against whatever we expect to gain, in order for us to make a rational decision. Okay. And not be swayed by the fact that, well, I've already been working on this for 3 months and, blah, 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 blah. So I guess I'll just, stick it out. Okay. So I think those are things that make it difficult to say no. And we need to keep those in mind so that we don't fall into a trap, right? And if we're in a situation, and I'm gonna post in the show notes this part about why saying no is hard, so that after you watch this show, if you need to, you can refer back to it, or you can even copy it out of the show notes and make yourself a little cheat sheet. I do that with several things. That's what these are back here. They're kind of cheat sheets and affirmations, things that I need to keep in mind in order to make good decisions, or keep my head in the game, that kind of thing. So it might be something, you want to post, or have it, on a window in your computer, something, whatever you're going to do. So you're not tempted to say yes when you really ought to say no. All right. So I think that's one thing to look at. Another thing to look at is, what is the cost of yes? Yes is almost never a cost-free decision in business. In order for us to get something, we have to give something, our services, our product. Okay, that's the bargain of business. So yes is not cost-free. Yes comes with an expense to it. So I'm going to tell another story. The first incident where I should have said no, and or I should have asked more questions, first of all, and then as a result, that said no. So I had a friend of mine, great guy. His name is Ed Saxey. We were in a networking group together for many years. Ed was an accountant who went into the commercial real estate business, did very well. And part of his company was, he did commercial property management. And this was back when I had my real estate company. I did mostly residential property management. And so he had a client come to him who had a bunch of commercial, or I don't know, several commercial buildings, I think, but she had one apartment building, and he didn't manage apartment buildings. So he called me up and he asked me if I'd be interested in handling this building for the owner. And because it was Ed calling me, and like I said, I've always have thought very highly of him. So I said, yeah, sure, and nothing against Ed, but I just, assumed, I guess, that, he had, vetted her. He told me he was managing some buildings for her, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to call this person Julie as well. Okay, so there, so you know, there's no, not the real name. So she had a building in Bel Air, California. Okay, Bel Air is a district of the city of Los Angeles, very high end. Okay, and the building was older. I want to say it was probably built in the 50s. I mean, it was in, moderately good shape. But every tenant drove, a BMW, a Mercedes. So these weren't, fabulously wealthy people, the kind who owned homes in Bel Air, but they were paying pretty big rents, and they were obviously making good money. I think they were making more money than I was at the time, and expected a pretty high level of service in their apartments. And like the first example I gave you, uh, the owner was she was cheap. There's just no way else of describing it. It was always a major discussion to get her to spend any money on repairs. She was always blaming the tenants for breaking things out of carelessness or whatever. And I would say to her, you know, I just remembered her name. I got to be careful not to say it. Julie, this is the cost of owning a building. And, these are residential tenants. These are not commercial tenants, so they are not responsible for repairs unless it's in the lease, which it typically is not. And so I have to make these repairs, and then it would reduce the amount of money she got from the building each month. And this went on for years, right? And I just every time I had to speak to her, it was God, I wish I didn't have to call her, that kind of thing. And I went on and on and on. And several years after taking on the building, I was talking to Ed, and for some reason, Julie came up in the conversation. And I just realized this is funny because Ed's wife's name, now that I recall, is Julie, but not his wife. It was, again, just a name. And uh, and I mentioned that, that I was, that I've been handling her building and blah 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 blah. And he said, "You're still handling her building?" I said, "Yeah, of course. I mean, look, you referred her to me." I said, "She's a pain in the neck, but I wouldn't, risk, her thinking badly of you because because you referred her to somebody who then turned around and, dumped her." And he's like, "Are you kidding? I dumped her years ago. She's awful." I'm like, "Oh no." That was the first time I realized you could fire a client. The cost of yes was so high working for this woman, the stress and the constant difficult interaction with the tenants, where I was the one who had to tell them things always that they didn't want to hear, like, I can't make this repair right now, or you know you're going to have to pay more rent even though the repairs are pending, or whatever it was, right? The cost of yes was incredibly high in that instance. And so after I got off the phone with Ed, I basically turned around and I told Julie that I was terminating the our agreement at the end of the following month or whatever it was. And you know now that I think about it, she wasn't particularly surprised. I think she may have been surprised I had hung in there that long. She was probably used to having change property managers every few months or year or so, because she was so difficult to deal with. Now you might argue, did she have no self-awareness? And the answer is I think not. So um, we have to look beyond just the dollars, right? What is the cost of having said yes, in terms of a tax on our energy, on our time, on our focus, on our overall well-being, and on our ability to take on projects that will work better and be more profitable. Okay. That is always the underlying question of cost. We have a finite amount of time that we can devote to work. Okay. Even if we work every minute of the day, we still only have 24 hours to work. Okay. And of course, we can't work every minute of the day. We've got to sleep. We do have to eat. We do have to, attend to personal hygiene once in a while, et cetera, right? So the reality is we have a limited number of hours each day that we can work. And if we're taking it up, working on something to which we should have said no, that means we are now hampered if we want to say yes to something that comes along, okay, that really is a much better thing for us to be working on. Minimally, even if we say yes to both, now we cannot devote as much time, attention, and energy to the good project because we're bogged down by the awful project. Okay. So not only so we need to examine anytime we take on a project, what is the cost of saying yes? Okay. And there's a saying that when we say yes to the wrong thing, we may end up having to say no to the right thing, and that is not a formula for a successful business. Okay, so when should you say no, right? How do you work through that analysis? So um, I've got a three step or 3 point framework, if you will, to help you evaluate an offer or a proposition in a business situation. Excuse me. So number one, alignment. Does it match your goals? Okay. So let's say that you have a plumbing company. If you've watched this show regularly, I oftentimes talk about plumbing companies. You know, fantastic business to be in these days because AI will help plumbers work more efficiently, but no AI is going to be able to do what a plumber can do, right? So if you are a plumber and someone asks you to fix something electrical, right? Does that match your goals? I mean, if you're a plumber and you're a licensed plumber, hopefully, right? Does it match your goals to be doing electrical repairs? And most likely the answer is no. Now, by the way, you may know how to do them and you may even enjoy doing them, but does it match your goals? If the answer is no, but I still want to do it, then maybe you need to change your goals. Maybe you need to change your business to one that does plumbing and electrical. And then I guess, go get an electrical contractor's license or whatever, right? So, number one is to look at alignment. How does this shape up with what I'm looking to do or working to do in my business? Does it fit? Right. So, in my business as a professional fiduciary, so my license permits me to act as an administrator in probate, as a trustee, and as a conservator and a guardian. Now, with respect to the last two, conservator and guardian, oftentimes there's a whole healthcare oversight component that goes with being a guardian and a conservator. So from time to time, people will call me up and ask me about being a conservator or a guardian. And my response is, I only do the financial side of those. So if you want someone who will handle the care of the person as well as the finances, I don't do that. I don't have the background to do it. Okay. I said, now if you're content with me contracting out the healthcare side of it, and I handle the financial part of it, that I will discuss with you, but I don't handle the healthcare side of it. Okay. And there's lots of reasons why I don't. Number one is, as I mentioned a minute ago, I don't know enough about it. Number one. Number two, don't like doing it. When I was a Boy Scout, we used to visit, at the time they were called old age homes or nursing homes, and I saw some of the stuff. I can't deal with it. Not my thing. Okay. It's very hard for me to, watch people suffering and all of that. And I have a hard time dealing with people who are declining. I mean, I do it when I have to. I certainly did it for my dear Marie. Of course, we were very close, and that was an exception. Um, but she's the only one I've done that for in all the years that I've been in my profession. That was a special case, because of the relationship that we had. But as a professional, it doesn't make sense for me to do that kind of work because it doesn't match my goals. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, capacity. Do you have the time and energy to take this on? Okay, and that's an important question, and there needs to be a realistic assessment done, uh, of this. So, um, for several months I was involved in potentially being appointed as as the probate administrator on a particular case. And it's been going on now for the appointment, just the appointment hearings have been going on now for months. And It keeps getting more egregious and more egregious. And so maybe a month or a month and a half ago, after a hearing, I talked to a close friend of mine who also is a lawyer. He advises me personally, and told him what was going on. And I said, I think I need to just bow out of this. It's going on and on and on. I don't see an end. I've already devoted quite a bit of time and mental energy to this. And even if in the end I get appointed, all I can see is conflict, a tremendous amount of time and energy needing to be spent. And the reality of probate administration is, largely I get paid the same amount whether it's a smooth probate or a highly contested one. And my lawyer friend said to me, "Yeah, I agree that it's time for you to bow out of that one." And so I did, right? And that's a part of the business that I'm in. Yeah, things can look, pretty clear and easy at the beginning. Once I climb into it, oftentimes it's much more contentious than I assessed, or it becomes more contentious. It's hard to know up front, and so there comes a point where I have to say no, because I don't have the capacity to continue essentially working for free, hoping that I'll get appointed and at some point will get, paid for not only the work that I do, but all the time spent getting the appointment. So do you have the capacity? Do you have the time and the energy to take this on? And then number three, and this is the one I think that is in some ways most important, and it's the one we're least likely to rely on, and that is, what does our gut say? Okay, does it feel right? And I remember going all the way back to my first company. There were times when I would get a gut feeling about something, and I would ignore the gut feeling, and I would say 9 times out of 10, deeply regret it. Deeply regret it. And so I think that we have to learn to trust our gut feeling. And that's a hard thing to do, right? It can feel egotistical. It can feel really uncomfortable. Like, I can't. We live in a society that claims to be very rational, and a gut feeling doesn't seem to fall into the category of being rational. And yet, I would argue that when all is said and done, our gut feeling is really the sum of all we know, uh, mentally, all we know in terms of information, and sort of mentally and emotionally about a particular situation. And it all comes into, in essence, our gut. And if our gut is if we have a bad feeling about it, then the answer should be no. And we have to learn to trust our gut. So you might boil this down into something called the hell yes or no principle, that was promulgated by a fellow named Derek Sivers. And basically it works just like it says. If it's not hell yes, then it's no. Now, I don't know that I 100% agree with Mr. Sivers. I don't know that it always has to be hell yes, or heck yes, maybe I should say. But it should be strong. It should, if you're getting a bad gut feeling, it's for sure it's not yes. And if you have kind of a you don't have if you have a neutral gut feeling, it should be a pretty strong yes before you move forward. It may not have to be heck yes, but it should be a strong yes. There should be a strong alignment to your goals, and you should be confident that you have the capacity to do it if you're not getting a strong, gut feeling that yes is the answer. Okay, so you're so I talk with this. I'm going to apply this in a different context. So we've been talking about running a business, but I'm going to apply this to job hunting for just a minute. So uh, typically, when you talk to people about job hunting, they'll talk about going on interviews, and I have not liked. I just don't like that term. Interview A job interview in some way implies that you're meeting with the hiring manager, and it's like, oh, please, may I have a job, Oliver in Oliver Twist, please sir, may I have some more, right? He's begging for food. That's what an interview is. um, we should think about such situations as a meeting to discuss a job. And when I used to job coach or do job hunting coaching for people coming out of the military, I would tell them that. I said, you are not going on interviews. You are having meetings to discuss a job. And when you're talking to the hiring manager, your perspective should be to ask questions that will allow you to say yes to a job offer if you get one. Okay, that should be the perspective, right? If you don't have a reason to say yes to a job offer, then you probably shouldn't say yes to a job offer. If your gut feeling isn't like, I want this job, you probably shouldn't take that job. It's probably not going to work out. And this is a big problem among veterans, where I don't remember the figures exactly anymore, but I think like 50 or 60% of veterans leave their first post-military job within the first year or two of getting out of the military. It's a very, very high percentage. And part of the problem is they feel very under pressure to get a job, any kind of job, because they're leaving the military, and they're losing that security of having a paycheck. Well, that's all good and well, but if you say yes to the wrong job, you're not going to be getting anywhere, and you're going to be frustrated. It's going to negatively impact your overall transition to civilian life, et cetera, et cetera. So when we're in a prospective business situation, I think the same thing applies, in the sense that we're looking for reasons to say yes. If we don't have reasons to say yes, then probably the correct answer is no, right? And it's a hard discipline, really to stick with. So, um, you know, um, the, I've got a, I'm looking at my notes here for a minute. I see I've got a couple more notes on this idea of Derek Sivers about hell yes or no. So basically the idea is if you have, if you're offered an opportunity, client, a project, a meeting, a partnership, whatever, okay, if your immediate reaction isn't enthusiastic or excited, okay, then you should probably decline and say no, right? That's his philosophy. So the idea is what it helps cut out the sort of things, and this is what we want to do in general in our business life. We want to cut out taking on projects where it's kind of like, okay, I guess I'll do it, or yeah, maybe, we want to cut those out. Okay, so what we want to do is work to have a screening system, if you will, for projects so we can focus on what truly matters, where we have room for the better opportunities, okay, while we protect our time, energy, and integrity, right? So, and this is why I talk about saying no for building wealth and keeping sanity, okay? So, it's all good and well to have a successful business, but if you're getting an ulcer, your family life is falling apart, what has been the price of that success, right? And so the ability to say no looms very large if we want to have an overall worthwhile life. Okay, all right, so assuming then that we're going to develop the ability to say no, right? So part of that is there are ways of saying no and there are ways of saying no. Okay? So if someone offers you an opportunity, say, are you kidding? I wouldn't work with you if you were the last potential client on earth. Okay. Not the right way to say no. Okay? There's no reason to insult people merely because you're not interested in a particular proposal. Okay. On the other hand, I don't think we should lie. So, no, I'm too busy when you're not. I don't think that's the right thing to do either, right? Because there's an integrity issue there, right? What happens if the next day someone comes to you with a proposal for a project to which you say yes, and it just so happens that the person to whom you said yes and the person the previous day to whom you said no talk, right? And the guy you said no to says, well, gosh, he told me yesterday he didn't have time. Now he's saying yes to you the next day. That doesn't sound right. I mean, I don't think you're going to get good service from him. Okay. So you can say, oh, that's very remote. That will never happen. Well, maybe not, though. You'd be surprised. 6 degrees of separation, if you know what that means, right? So I think when we say no, we want to say no with integrity. So for a prospective client, for example, okay, I think here's a good phrase to use. I appreciate the opportunity, but I don't think I'm the best fit for what you need. I'd rather point you to someone who is. Okay, so you're saying no, but you're saying no in a way that still helps the person potentially get their needs met. Okay, so I'll give you an example. This is going back maybe about 3 months ago now, maybe a little bit more. Someone contacted me about being a trustee on a trust in that was cited in Illinois. And I've looked at the rules in Illinois for doing what I do. They're not 100% clear to me. And Illinois is a difficult regulatory climate like California, but not, I mean, similar level of difficulty, but potentially different issues. And it really was a situation. I thought this is not the right situation for me. So, but I didn't say no to the client. Or the potential client. What I said was, you know what, this isn't the right fit for me. Actually, I turned it around. I said, I don't think I'm the right fit for what you need, but let me refer you to a colleague of mine who I think would be able to handle this for you. Now, funny ending to the story. the person had also contacted my colleague. So when I contacted him to make the introduction, he said, "Oh yeah, I'm already talking to such and such." I'm like, "Great." I said, "Just so you know, she contacted me, and I told her I didn't think I was the right fit, and I suggested you, so I just want to let you know about that." He's like, "Hey, I appreciate it." Right. So I don't know. I never followed up with him honestly to see if he got it, but you know, presumably it would help him to have someone who's in his profession say, he's the right person for this. So by saying no to something that it was not a right yes for me, I was able to still help the person out and help out a colleague of mine, at least potentially, right? So there's some relationship building going on there, even though I said no. Okay, so that's one way to handle that's a way to handle things well. Okay, so if it's a collaboration or a partnership, so here's a phrase you might use. This sounds exciting, but it's not aligned with our current focus. Let's keep the door open for the future. Okay, no, it's a polite way again of saying no, but maybe at a different time or with a different project. Okay, and that's legitimate, right? Um, so again, this is going back to January, right? Because it was during the fires here in LA. Somebody contacted me about a project that he was considering taking on, and he asked me if I was interested in working on it with him. And so I said, well, tell me a little bit, tell me about it. And he did. And I said, this I don't think this is really in line with what I do and with the kind of skills I bring to the table. If you have a couple of questions that you think I can answer that will help you with it, I'm happy to do that, as a professional courtesy. But I don't, as a collaboration, I don't think this is one for us to work on. Maybe there'll be something else down the road. Okay. And by the way, that was the second time he had brought me something. Now, the first time he brought me something, we went a little bit deeper on it. It didn't work out for whatever reason. So presumably, if he has something else, he'll run it by me. And won't be turned off by the fact that I told him no on this more recent one. Okay, so that's another way to do it. All right. So then here's one that can work in kind of any situation. So I need to protect my bandwidth for the commitments I've already made. I wouldn't be able to give this what it deserves, right? So this is essentially saying to the potential customer or partner, collaborator, no, but I'm saying no for your benefit because you'd be relying on me, and I don't think I'd be able to fulfill your expectations. Okay. And again, we're taking what we want to do is take the responsibility on ourselves for saying no. We don't want to blame the other person, if you will, for saying that we're not going to say yes. And at the same time, it leaves the door open for future engagement. That's really the goal. Okay, so it keeps our integrity intact, but it also keeps us sane and able to build our business most effectively. Okay, so look, we want to be direct. We want to treat the person decently. Okay, and we want to be brief. So there's no reason to make a long, elaborate statement of no. Just a sentence or two should suffice, and kind of move on with your day. All right, so um what happens after you say no? Well, candidly, it depends on the person to whom you said no. Now, some people, no matter how nicely and politely you say no, they're going to resent it. Okay, they're going to, as my dad used to say, take umbrage. Now, here's my question: If somebody gets mad at you because you turned them down, is that someone you would have wanted to work with? Now, I know the answer for me. For me, the answer is no. If someone can't hear the word no, I don't want to work with them, because at some point in that project, in that relationship, almost for sure, I'm going to have to say to them no to some part of the project. And if they're going to get mad at that point, what's going to happen? Is the whole project going to blow up now because I had to tell them no? And now I've spent all this time, effort, money, whatever it is. Okay. So if the person isn't um, isn't essentially respectful about receiving the no, you know that you've just dodged a bullet. Okay. By the way, this is true in personal life as well. Okay. Uh, I was introduced to a woman. This is going back probably about 6, 7 months ago. The first time this has happened since my marriage broke up. We had a very nice first phone call, but afterwards, kind of thinking about it, I realized this is not the right situation for me. And so I got back to her after a little while and said, you know what, I'm not in the right place to be getting involved with someone. And so, I've got this on my plate and this on my plate and this on my plate. So, but thank you for, a nice phone call. And I got a kind of nasty response to that. Okay. And when I saw that, I thought, okay, really dodged a bullet there. Right. Look, sometimes we have to say no. I'm not going to claim that I've always been gracious when people said no to me, but it depends on the context. But if hopefully when you say no, okay, the person will respect the fact that you said no, that you were thoughtful about it, and kind of no hard feelings. Okay. Um, I've shared with you a couple of stories. Now, by the way, in both of the stories that I shared with you, both of the Julies, I'm pretty sure they resented my eventually saying no. Probably, you know, I'm relatively sure they probably said nasty things about me. And that's part of the problem with having said yes when I should have said no. That will almost always lead to a negative outcome, right? If I had given them a thoughtful no from the beginning, obviously I would have saved myself a lot of aggravation, etc. But also, probably could have saved myself, two people who, think that I, am terrible because, essentially I dumped them, right? So, you know, uh, hopefully, you'll take these examples on board. You probably have examples from your own life, especially if you've dated and you've had to break up with somebody, right? Never a comfortable thing, right? And the reality is, as I just mentioned a minute or two ago, kind of it works the same way in dating and business. Commitments in some ways work the same, right? Better to give a thoughtful no up front, rather than sort of bump along and then people get involved in all these kind of things, and then you have to break it off. So this is, as I said at the beginning of the show, a crucial business skill: learning to say no, to build wealth and save your sanity. So I'll put a couple of excerpts from my what I've said from my remarks in the show notes if you want to have them, and hopefully this will help you going forward. So thank you very much for joining me today, my live viewers. Lamon, good to see you again, my friend. And let's see. That's it for this week in terms of shows. Next week on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Trust and Estates Weekly. My guest is Kelly Way, and she's going to be talking about estate planning for intellectual property. Given how much larger intellectual property looms as assets in a lot of people's estates, I think this is a very important discussion. I'm looking forward to having it with Kelly, and so I hope you'll tune in. On Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. I'm going to be talking about the Battle of Palo Alto, and we're going to be deriving some lessons from that. And then a week from today, I'll be back for the next edition of People Making Money, again at 10 a.m. Wednesday. And then next week, it also on Thursday is my every other show, Jiggers' Place. We'll sit back at 5 p.m. Pacific time, have a cocktail, and we're going to talk about the concept of duty. What do we have to do? What is our duty? And I think this is a particularly important topic for men to examine. I think we are a duty-centric sex, if you will. Not that women don't have duties, they do, but I think to be a good man means being very focused on your duty. And so we're going to talk about that, a heavy subject that requires a cocktail beforehand. So thanks again for joining me and wishing you a wonderful rest of the day and week. And signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle.